During this global pandemic and era of social distancing, I spoke with Quansheng from our studios in Washington, D.C. He's a specialist in international relations on East Asia. He's also a member of the National Committee on U.S. China relations. It's such a remarkable story, and I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think other countries could have this sort of progress where they could lift literally so many people out of poverty. What's been the key? How has China been able to do it?
Indeed, it is remarkable. It's amazing if you look at the whole globe in terms of how many population got reduced or removed from poverty situation. I guess there are basically three major remarkable efforts. First, China has set up a national goal to fight against poverty. That is a very significant. Second, the implementation part also in terms of how to fulfill its national goal. In particular, if you look at here, it's each level of administration, like from the central level all the way down to the township level. You know, there are also provincial, county, and others, and each has set up that very necessary. In fact, there are even some specific numbers. You have to do how many people would out of poverty for every year. So that's over decades effort. If you look at the 80s, 90s, and then all the way up to this century. Finally, there are also very specific measures to do that. For example, there are nationwide so-called D-ball, that is the insurance for low-income family and individual. At least the state would cover some basic needs, such as food, water, electricity, and among others. Of course, it's very minimum, but still, you don't have to go to the street. You don't have to. You have some basic things to live with. So those kind of very specific measures, I guess number one, of course, is a determination from the leadership, and all the way up to a very concrete implementation measures. And those are the key for the success.
Quansheng is the director of the Center for Asian Studies and chair of Asian Studies Research Council at American University in Washington, D.C. He's also the author of the book, Interpreting Chinese Foreign Policy. What are the key takeaways that you would give to, when we're looking at a new administration, in terms of creating a good foreign policy relationship with China moving forward with the United States and China?
Well, this is a critical time for U.S. China relations. We understand that the difference between current administration, Trump administration, and the next administration is that the Trump administration directly placed China as an enemy, is the biggest challenger. Biden administration, on the other hand, agreed that China would be a competitor. So enemy and competitor, there are some similarities. However, there are some basic difference in nature. A competitor can still work together. An enemy, you have to fight each other. So hopefully, the next administration between United States and China in terms of the U.S. China policy will not only work on the competitive relationship with China, but also to find some common ground, work together at such issues as climate change, financial stability, even security issues such as Korea Peninsula, how to deal with North Korea nuclear, Middle East. Those are all the issues the two countries can work together.
In the past 40 years, China has moved from a primarily agrarian economy into one of the world's most rapidly urbanizing countries. In 2015, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced plans to end extreme poverty across the country by 2020. In November of 2020, the government announced that China had succeeded in lifting all citizens above the absolute poverty line of less than $1 a day. But gaps between rural and urban areas still exist. It's also interesting, I think, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this, the targeted aspect of this, because what you find with a lot of governments and even NGOs, a lot of times they come in and they say, well, this worked here, it's scalable, it'll work here, but each community is different. You even went down to the township. It's not even, province, it's down to townships. And each township is different and has a different complexity and a different approach to lift people out. And I think rather than have it one size fit all or the central government saying, everybody do this, that wasn't the way it all unfolded, is it?
Indeed. If you look at the situation in China, it's also a huge gap between the rich area, such as coastal, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and others, and inland area, in particular the northwest, the so-called Great West part, relatively poor. So the target is particularly on that, the poverty area, not coastal cities and others. And also another gap is between rural area and the urban area. And so the rural area, agricultural farmers and others, they also received much attention. And finally, when you mentioned the target, this is indeed a way to do that. It is, each level of leader, not only township, and even county, you have to pledge you will remove poverty within 3 years by certain number. If you don't do that, you cannot fulfill, then the idea is let other people do that. You will be transferred to some other positions, and then to have a somehow more capable local level cadres or leadership, they will do that. So those ways give certain incentives for local leaders, local officials to do. If you did well, then you got a promotion. So through that mechanisms, also working to really ensure this situation will follow the idea of the whole national goal.
Massive infrastructure investments in China, like roads, railways, internet, and the telephone system, help decrease poverty, especially in rural areas. One of the things about China, when you think of China, you talked about the Belt and Road Project, infrastructure. How important has that been in terms of lifting people out of poverty?
That's actually the strength of Chinese economy. China always do the infrastructure first. I guess that's almost like a tradition. There is a old saying in Chinese called 要想富先修路, meaning if you want to be rich, you got your road communication built first. So infrastructure really play an essential and important function.
How do you guard against losing what makes China so special, its culture, while still growing its economy?
Well, this is actually when early we talk about revitalization and the China dream and past glorious past, and all of that required China need to not only learn from the West, but also to keep its own tradition and culture. I guess China realized that it's important, so China must have a balanced action to do that. We know, for example, Confucianism and the Confucius ideas now increasingly got attention. I visited myself Quansheng, the hometown of Confucius, and nowadays it's quite a place. Many people go there not only for the tourist reason, but also to learn past traditional philosophy, traditional ideas. So that's critical.
Since the 1970s, China has adjusted its rural development policy strategies to fit the rapidly evolving socio-economic situations. At first, policy reform focused on boosting food production. Today, that focus has shifted to ensuring long-term food security through the sustainable use of natural resources. One of the things that I find fascinating about, going to these rural communities, we've done a lot of stories on this. How do you pull these people out of extreme poverty? And some of the methods that they're looking at is going in and saying, well, these people are producing honey. What if we did e-commerce and sold this honey? And getting people to think differently and approach things differently. And it's just been remarkable to see what's happened with some of these areas. And also, I've seen some areas that rather remote where they're thinking about tourism. How do we get people to come here? Talk to us about that whole feature of it, thinking outside the box and how to go about trying to change the financial outcome of some of these people in these communities.
Indeed, this is one of the most effective way, that is, we cannot, as a government, we cannot only give you financial support. We have to let you learn how to make living. And then, of course, it's not every, because people living there for hundreds, even thousands of years. So in other words, you have to encourage them to have a certain way of creativity, to think broadly. What would be a way to fully utilize your own advantages? Like, if this area is suitable for cotton, why don't you try to plant some? And the same thing with the fruits, with others, with many examples. The villagers, particular villages, they learned how to use their advantage and to develop and also market the economy. Because remote area, people may not necessarily used to this, in China, long time, collective way rather than a commercial, rather than market economy. So in this way, you have to enlighten people. For doing that, my understanding is that each county level official, they will send specific individual cadres, and all the way down to village, down to the production team, and to try to help villagers figure out what would be the best, most advantageous way for you to meet this market economy. If you do agriculture, if you do fruits, if you do cotton, or if you may even set up a small factory so-called the township factory to do things like that. This kind of thing used to be very popular along coastal cities. We all heard like a small town like Yiwu. They produced a lot like commercial items. Even the presidential campaign here, their flag, their hats is produced in Yiwu, that particular township. Those kind of items, the remote western areas, rural areas, they may not necessarily think about. So in that way, there are a lot of stories about how to really reduce poverty, and this is actually the best way. Rather than they still do nothing, you only provide money, provide financial aid. How about if they use up, right? So you have to let them to learn how to make money. Another thing is, for extreme poor area, sometimes may not suitable even for human being, but they just live there for hundreds of years. And the government or the county or provincial official, they try to work with the villagers to reallocate the whole village. That's also not too many, but there are this kind of cases as well.
Dr. Zhao, one final question. A few years back, I interviewed Jimmy Carter, and he talked about the relationship that was obviously created with Richard Nixon, but he inherited it and grew it even further. And he talked about just how important this relationship between the United States and China is. And he said it's interesting, every 4 years you see candidates running for president, and part of their campaign is to run against China, and I'm going to be tough on China. And he said after they're elected president, they generally change and shift. This is the first election that I can think of where that didn't happen, where you had a president who ran against China and then ran against China while he was president, and then was prepared to run against China again if he won a second term. What's the damage from something like that? And do you think because of that, it creates a climate where there's kind of an anti-China sentiment no matter, and it's difficult to navigate that even with the new administration?
Yes. I remember somewhere I read Henry Kissinger claimed that U.S. China relations cannot return to the past. So it seems like this is the way partially reflect reality. That is China's GDP all the way up to 60%. Some people are jokingly saying whenever a country up to that level, it will be regarded as a challenger. The first one, Soviet Union, and the second one, Japan. We do remember Japan bashing back to the 80s, 90s. And now China is in that position. But that's not the only reason. The reason also something to do interaction. You do this, I do that. So both countries need to be really thinking about what would be the best way. You mentioned President Carter. Indeed, he played one of the pioneers, followed Richard Nixon and others, to not only open up relations with China, but also normalize relations with China. And he's even, in his 90s, he still play instrumental role. And we do need more politicians, more leaders in that category. The past President Bush, the senior Bush, he too played a very significant role. So we need leaders, politicians with vision. So crisis control, crisis management, even more important for today. And based on that issue, and the two powers will work together on more concrete issues.
We'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.